My name is Margaret, and I'm 58 years old. What I'm about to share with you happened on a Tuesday afternoon that changed my life forever. I had just finished my shift at the accounting firm where I'd worked for over 15 years, and I decided to stop by McDonald's to grab a quick bite before heading home. It was one of those days when cooking felt like too much effort, and I just wanted something simple and fast. As I stood in line, scrolling through my phone and trying to decide what to order, I noticed the restaurant was busier than usual. Families with children, teenagers hanging out after school, and office workers like me grabbing their afternoon snacks. I felt comfortable in that familiar environment. McDonald's had always been a judgment-free zone for me, or so I thought. When my turn came, I approached the counter with a smile. The young cashier, probably in her early 20s, greeted me politely. "Good afternoon, what can I get for you today?" I ordered my usual, a Big Mac meal with a Diet Coke and apple pie for dessert. Nothing excessive, nothing that would draw attention, just a regular customer making a regular order. But as I waited for my food, standing off to the side near the pickup counter, I heard a voice behind me that would haunt me for months to come. A man, probably in his 40s, was talking loudly on his phone. At first, I didn't pay attention. People have phone conversations all the time in fast food restaurants. But then, his voice got louder, more aggressive, and I realized he wasn't talking to someone on the phone at all. "You've already devoured all the food in your lifetime, you whale," he shouted directly at me. The entire restaurant fell silent. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Children stared with wide eyes while their parents quickly looked away. The teenage employees behind the counter froze, uncertain of how to handle the situation. Even the background music seemed to fade as his words echoed through the space. I felt my cheeks burn with embarrassment, and my heart pound so hard I thought everyone could hear it. My hands started shaking, and I couldn't bring myself to turn around and face this man who had decided to humiliate me in front of dozens of strangers. The weight of every eye in that restaurant pressed down on me like a physical force. I wanted to disappear, to become invisible, to somehow undo the last 30 seconds of my life. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours, but was probably only a few seconds. I could hear my own breathing, shallow and rapid. My order number was called, but I couldn't move. The paper bag with my food sat on the counter, waiting, while I stood frozen in place, processing what had just happened. This wasn't the first time someone had made a cruel comment about my size, but it was the first time it had happened so publicly, so violently, with such intentional cruelty. If this story of a courageous plus-size woman has already moved you, hit the like button now so more people can watch this video. To understand the full impact of that moment at McDonald's, you need to know who I was at that time in my life. I had always been what people call a bigger girl, even as a child. My mother, bless her heart, used to say I was big-boned or healthy, trying to protect me from the world's judgment. But I knew from a very young age that I was different from the other kids. Growing up in suburban Ohio in the 1970s and 80s, being overweight as a girl meant facing constant scrutiny. I learned early to make myself smaller in every way except physically. Smaller voice, smaller presence, smaller dreams. I became the funny fat friend, the one who always had a joke ready to deflect attention from my appearance. It was my survival mechanism, and it served me well through high school and college. By my 50s, I had built what I considered a successful life despite my size. I had worked my way up to senior accountant at Morrison & Associates, a respected firm in downtown Cleveland. I owned my own small house in a quiet neighborhood, drove a reliable car, and had managed to save a decent amount for retirement. I had a few close friends, mostly women I'd met through work or church. And while I'd never married or had children, I'd convinced myself I was content with my independent life. But here's the truth I didn't want to admit. I had spent decades making myself invisible. I shopped online whenever possible to avoid the embarrassment of asking for extended sizes in stores. I always chose aisle seats at movies and theaters, not for easy bathroom access as I'd tell people, but because I was afraid of making other patrons uncomfortable. I ate lunch at my desk instead of joining colleagues at restaurants. I declined invitations to weddings, parties, and social gatherings, always with a polite excuse, but really because I feared being the largest person in the room. My world had gradually shrunk to the size of my comfort zone: work, home, church, and the grocery store. I had become an expert at navigating life while trying to take up as little space as possible, both physically and emotionally. I chose loose-fitting clothes in dark colors, sat in the back row of meetings, and spoke up only when directly asked for my professional opinion. The saddest part was that I had convinced myself this was normal. I thought this was just how life worked for women like me, that we had to earn our place in the world by being exceptionally helpful, exceptionally funny, or exceptionally quiet. I had accepted that certain experiences, finding clothes that fit well, feeling confident in public spaces, dating, traveling comfortably, simply weren't meant for people of my size. I had no idea that the humiliation I was about to experience at McDonald's would become the catalyst for the most transformative period of my entire life. The immediate aftermath of that man's cruel words hit me like a physical blow. Standing there in that McDonald's, with every person in the restaurant staring at me, I felt something break inside my chest. It wasn't just embarrassment. I was used to that. This was deeper, more devastating. It was the complete shattering of the careful bubble I'd built around myself over 5 decades. My hands began to tremble uncontrollably, and I could feel tears building behind my eyes. But what struck me most wasn't the sadness, it was the rage. A white-hot anger that started in my stomach and spread through my entire body like wildfire. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't sad about being fat. I was absolutely furious that someone felt entitled to treat me like I was less than human because of my size. I finally managed to turn around and look at this man who had decided to make me his afternoon entertainment. He was average height, average build, wearing a wrinkled business suit and holding a briefcase. Nothing remarkable about him at all, except for the cruel smirk on his face as he watched my reaction. He looked like he was enjoying my discomfort, like he'd accomplished something by humiliating me in front of strangers. "Did you have something to say to me?" I asked, my voice shaking but audible. The words surprised me. I had never confronted someone who had made comments about my weight before. Usually, I would just pretend I hadn't heard, or I would make a self-deprecating joke to diffuse the tension. He looked taken aback for a moment, clearly not expecting me to respond. "Just stating facts, lady. Maybe if you ate less, there'd be more food for everyone else." He said it with such casual cruelty, as if he genuinely believed he was performing some kind of public service by shaming me. That's when something unprecedented happened. A woman at a nearby table, a complete stranger, stood up and walked over to us. She was probably in her 30s, average size, with 2 small children at her table. "Excuse me," she said to the man, her voice steady and clear. "There's absolutely no excuse for speaking to anyone that way. You should be ashamed of yourself." Then a teenager behind the counter spoke up. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. We don't tolerate harassment of our customers." Other voices joined in, people telling him his behavior was unacceptable, that he needed to apologize, that he was setting a terrible example for the children present. But the damage to my emotional state was already done. Even as this amazing support surrounded me, I felt exposed and vulnerable in a way I'd never experienced before. I grabbed my food and rushed out to my car, where I sat in the parking lot and cried harder than I had in years. Not just tears of humiliation, but tears of grief for all the years I'd spent believing that I deserved less respect, less kindness, less space in the world because of my body. That night, I couldn't eat the meal I'd bought. I couldn't concentrate on television or read or do any of the activities I normally use to unwind after work. I kept replaying the moment over and over, but strangely, I found myself focusing less on the cruel man and more on the strangers who had defended me. They had seen my humanity when I had almost forgotten it existed. As I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling of my bedroom, my mind began to wander through decades of similar experiences. The McDonald's incident had opened a floodgate of memories I'd carefully buried over the years. Each one came rushing back with startling clarity, as if they'd happened yesterday instead of years or decades ago. I remembered being 16 and shopping for a prom dress with my mother. We'd gone to 4 different stores, and in each one, the saleswomen had given us that look, the one that said, We don't really carry anything for girls like you." In the fifth store, a clerk actually said out loud, "We don't stock those sizes. You might want to try the specialty shops across town." My mother had squeezed my hand and whispered, "We'll find something beautiful," but I could see the hurt in her eyes too. We ended up ordering a dress from a catalog, and while it was lovely, I never forgot the feeling of being too big for a normal teenage experience. There was the airplane incident when I was in my 30s, traveling to my cousin's wedding in California. I had saved for months to afford the trip, and I was so excited to see family I hadn't seen in years. But when I got to my seat, I realized with horror that I would need a seatbelt extender. The flight attendant was professional about it, but I could feel the passenger next to me tense up, and I spent the entire 5-hour flight trying to make myself as small as possible, apologizing silently for existing. I remembered job interviews where I could see the moment the interviewer's enthusiasm dimmed when I walked into the room. Qualified as I was, experienced as I was, there was always that split second of disappointment in their eyes. I learned to overcompensate by being more prepared than any other candidate, more knowledgeable, more willing to work longer hours. I got jobs, but I always felt like I had to prove I was worth the space I took up in the office. Then, there were the countless small daily humiliations, turnstiles at subway stations that were too narrow, restaurant booths where I couldn't fit comfortably, theater seats that left marks on my hips, store clerks who automatically assumed I was shopping for someone else when I picked up anything smaller than a 2X. Each incident by itself was manageable, but together they formed a constant background hum of otherness that followed me everywhere. The worst memories were the ones involving healthcare. Doctors who would look at my chart before looking at me, who would attribute every symptom to my weight without considering other possibilities. I once went to the emergency room with chest pain that turned out to be a panic attack. But the first thing the doctor said was, "Well, if you lost some weight, you wouldn't be having these problems." I walked out feeling like my health concerns were invalid simply because of my size. But perhaps the most painful memories were the ones involving my own family. Well-meaning relatives who would comment on my food choices at every gathering. "Are you sure you need dessert? Or maybe you should try the salad instead." Aunts who would buy me gym memberships for Christmas or diet books for my birthday, always with the explanation that they were just worried about my health. The constant underlying message was that my body was everyone's business, that my worth as a person was directly tied to my dress size. As these memories flooded back, I realized something profound. I had spent my entire adult life apologizing for my existence, trying to earn my right to take up space in the world. And that man at McDonald's? He hadn't just insulted me, he had vocalized the message I'd been receiving my entire life from society, family, and even from myself. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. I couldn't face the office, couldn't pretend everything was normal. I spent the day in my pajamas, drinking coffee and thinking harder about my life than I had in decades. The McDonald's incident had cracked something open inside me, and I couldn't stuff it back down. I found myself asking questions I'd never dared to ask before. Why did I believe that man had the right to humiliate me? Why had I accepted a lifetime of making myself smaller for other people's comfort? When had I decided that my size meant I deserved less respect, less joy, less of everything that makes life worth living? I walked through my house and really looked at it for the first time in years. It was neat and clean, but completely impersonal. No bright colors, no bold decorations, nothing that said, "Margaret lives here and she matters." My closet was full of shapeless clothes in black, navy, and brown. My refrigerator had pictures of other people's families, but none of myself. Even my own home reflected my belief that I should take up as little space as possible. I realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd done something purely for my own pleasure. When had I stopped believing I deserved good things? When had I started living like I was apologizing for existing? The questions kept coming, each one more painful than the last. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in years. I looked at myself in my full-length bedroom mirror. Really looked, not the quick glance while getting dressed or the careful avoidance of my reflection that had become my habit. I stood there and studied the woman looking back at me. Yes, I was fat. I was probably what medical charts would classify as severely obese. But I was also alive, breathing, intelligent, capable, and deserving of respect. I thought about the strangers at McDonald's who had defended me, and I wondered, if they could see my worth so clearly, why couldn't I? If a teenager working at a fast food restaurant could recognize that I deserved basic human dignity, why had I spent decades believing I didn't? That evening, I did something that surprised even me. I wrote a letter to myself. Not the self-critical, goal-setting kind of letter I might have written before, but a letter of apology. I apologized to myself for all the years I'd hidden, all the opportunities I'd declined, all the times I'd made myself smaller for other people's comfort. I apologized for believing the cruel voices instead of the kind ones, for choosing invisibility over authenticity. As I wrote, tears streaming down my face, I realized this was my moment of choice. I could let that man at McDonald's represent every person who had ever made me feel less than human, or I could let the strangers who defended me represent the possibility of a different kind of life. I could continue living in the shadows, or I could step into the light and claim my right to exist fully in this world. For the first time in decades, I chose myself. I chose the possibility that maybe, just maybe, I deserved more than the small, apologetic life I'd been living. The next morning, I woke up with something I hadn't felt in years: determination. Not the familiar determination to lose weight or hide better, but determination to live differently. I had no grand plan, no roadmap for transformation, but I had clarity about one thing. I was done apologizing for existing. My first act of rebellion was small but significant. Instead of putting on my usual loose black slacks and shapeless cardigan, I chose a purple blouse I'd bought months ago but never worn because I thought it was too bright for someone my size. I looked at myself in the mirror and thought, Margaret, you exist. You take up space, and that's not only okay, it's your right. At work that day, instead of eating lunch at my desk as I had for years, I walked to the small cafe down the street. My heart pounded as I entered the restaurant, but I held my head high and chose a table by the window instead of hiding in the back corner. When the server approached, I ordered what I actually wanted: a turkey club sandwich and sweet potato fries, instead of the salad I would have ordered before out of shame. As I sat there eating my lunch, something magical happened. The world didn't end. No one stared at me. No one made cruel comments about my food choices. The other diners were absorbed in their own conversations, their own lives. I realized that most of the judgment I'd been carrying around existed primarily in my own mind. That afternoon, I did something even more radical. I called my supervisor and asked to speak with her privately. Sarah had been my boss for 5 years, and while we had a good working relationship, I'd never shared anything personal with her. I told her about what had happened at McDonald's, not seeking sympathy, but wanting to explain why I'd been out the day before. Margaret, she said, looking genuinely shocked, I'm so sorry that happened to you, but I have to tell you something. You're one of the most competent, reliable people I've ever worked with. The fact that someone would treat you that way says nothing about you and everything about their character. Then she said something that completely floored me. You know, I've always wished you'd speak up more in our team meetings. You have such valuable insights, but you seem to hold back. I'd love to see you contribute more to our client presentations. I left that meeting with my head spinning. My supervisor wanted more from me, not less. She valued my professional opinion and wanted me to be more visible, not less visible. For years, I'd been trying to be the perfect, quiet employee who never caused problems, never took up too much space, never asked for anything. But what she actually wanted was for me to show up fully as myself. That evening, I made my first big decision. I was going to start saying yes to things I'd been avoiding. I pulled out a notepad and made a list of opportunities I'd declined over the past year. Office birthday parties, after-work drinks with colleagues, my church's annual retreat, my neighbor's invitation to join her book club. Each no had been motivated by the same fear, that my presence would make others uncomfortable, that I didn't belong in social situations, that I should stay home where I couldn't embarrass myself or anyone else. I decided to call my neighbor Lisa and ask if it was too late to join the book club. We'd been neighbors for 8 years, and she'd invited me multiple times, always with genuine warmth. I'd always declined with excuses about being too busy, but the truth was I was too scared. Margaret! Lisa's voice was bright with surprise when I called. Of course it's not too late. We'd love to have you. We meet next Tuesday at 7 p.m. at Janet's house. I'll text you the address and this month's book title. I'm so glad you decided to join us. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen with a cup of tea and realized I was smiling. Actually smiling. When was the last time I'd felt excited about a social event instead of anxious about it? And you, plus-size woman who is watching? Have you been through something similar? Share in the comments and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more empowerment stories. The book club meeting changed everything. I almost chickened out 3 times on Tuesday, standing in front of my closet trying on different outfits, my anxiety building with each passing hour. But at 6:55 p.m., I found myself standing on Janet's front porch, clutching the book we'd been assigned to read and trying to calm my racing heart. When Janet opened the door, her face lit up with genuine pleasure. Margaret, Lisa told me you were joining us. Come in, come in! The warmth in her voice immediately put me at ease. The living room held 6 other women, all different ages and sizes, sitting on couches and chairs with wine glasses and cups of tea, chatting animatedly about everything from work to children to weekend plans. What struck me immediately was how normal it felt. No one made a big deal about my size or acted surprised that I was there. They simply made room for me on the couch, offered me a drink, and included me in their conversation as if I'd been coming for years. For the first time in recent memory, I felt like I belonged somewhere, not because I was being exceptionally helpful or entertaining, but simply because I was me. The book discussion was lively and engaging. To my surprise, I found myself contributing naturally to the conversation. These women were intelligent and thoughtful, and they seemed genuinely interested in my perspectives. When I made a comment about the protagonist's journey toward self-acceptance, the room fell quiet in a way that made me worry I'd said something wrong. That's exactly it, said a woman named Carol, leaning forward with excitement. You just articulated what I've been trying to figure out about that character for weeks. She's not actually changing who she is. She's just finally allowing herself to be who she's always been. As the evening progressed, I discovered something remarkable. I was funny. Not funny in the self-deprecating way I'd always been, making jokes about my size to deflect attention, but genuinely witty and insightful. These women laughed at my observations about the book's themes and asked follow-up questions about my interpretations. They treated me like an intelligent person whose opinions mattered, and slowly, I began to treat myself the same way. When the book discussion wound down, the conversation turned to personal updates. Lisa mentioned she was training for a 5K charity walk. Anyone want to join me for training walks? She asked. I could use the company, and it's such a beautiful route through the park. Before I could talk myself out of it, I heard my own voice saying, I'd like to try that. The words surprised me as much as they surprised everyone else. I hadn't exercised intentionally in years, but something about the idea of walking with Lisa through the park sounded wonderful, not as punishment for my body, but as a celebration of what my body could do. Really? Lisa's face brightened. That's fantastic. How about Saturday mornings? We can start slow and build up gradually. It'll be fun to have a walking partner. Driving home that night, I felt something I barely recognized. Joy. Pure, uncomplicated joy at having spent an evening with interesting women who seemed to like my company. I hadn't thought once about my size during the entire 2-hour meeting. I had been present, engaged, fully myself, in a way I couldn't remember being in years. That night, I wrote in the journal I'd started keeping since the McDonald's incident. I wrote about the revelation that belonging wasn't something I had to earn through good behavior or self-erasure. These women had welcomed me simply because I was a person worth knowing. The idea was so foreign and so wonderful that I could barely wrap my mind around it. For the first time, I began to understand that the problem had never been my size. The problem had been my belief that my size made me less worthy of friendship, respect, and joy. My first walking session with Lisa was scheduled for the following Saturday at 9 a.m. I spent the entire week anxious about it, but also secretly excited. I dug out the athletic shoes I'd bought 2 years ago with good intentions but never worn, and I found a comfortable pair of leggings and a t-shirt that made me feel capable rather than self-conscious. When Saturday morning came, I met Lisa at the park entrance. She was already there, stretching and chatting with another woman I didn't recognize. "Margaret, perfect timing. This is Sandra. She decided to join us too." Sandra smiled warmly and shook my hand, and I realized this was going to be even better than I'd imagined. 3 women, all different sizes and fitness levels, supporting each other in getting healthier. We started at a gentle pace, and I was relieved to discover that I could keep up without embarrassing myself. As we walked along the tree-lined path, our conversation flowed naturally from books to work, to family, to dreams we'd put on hold. Sandra was a nurse at the local hospital who was training for a charity walkathon. Lisa was a teacher who had decided to prioritize her health after a minor scare with high blood pressure. "What made you decide to join us?" Sandra asked me as we rounded the lake at the center of the park. I found myself telling them about the McDonald's incident, about my years of hiding and making myself small, about my recent decision to start living differently. I expected them to be shocked or uncomfortable, but instead, they both nodded with understanding. "I've been there," Sandra said quietly. "Different situation, same feeling. Someone at the hospital cafeteria once said I was setting a bad example for patients by being overweight, as if my worth as a nurse had anything to do with my dress size. And I once had a parent tell the principal that maybe they needed a more athletic teacher for their child's PE class," Lisa added. "Never mind that I have a master's degree in education and 15 years of experience. Apparently, my body type was the problem." As we shared these stories, I realized something profound was happening. For the first time in my life, I was talking openly about the discrimination I'd faced without apologizing for my existence or making jokes to deflect the pain. These women understood, and their understanding gave me permission to acknowledge that the treatment I'd received was wrong, not something I'd brought on myself, but genuine prejudice that had nothing to do with my worth as a person. The following Monday at work, I took another step forward. Instead of sitting in the back during our weekly staff meeting, I chose a seat at the conference table. When Sarah asked for input on a new client presentation, I didn't wait to be directly called on. I raised my hand and offered my suggestions. "That's an excellent point." "Margaret," said Tom, one of my colleagues, "I think that approach would really resonate with this particular client. Have you worked with similar companies before?" As I explained my experience and recommendations, I watched the faces around the table. They were listening, actually listening, to what I had to say. No one seemed surprised that I had valuable input. No one acted like I was taking up too much space or speaking out of turn. They were treating me like the experienced professional I actually was. After the meeting, Sarah approached my desk. "Margaret, I've been thinking about what we discussed last week. We have a new client coming in next month. A mid-sized manufacturing company looking to restructure their accounting systems. I think you'd be perfect to lead that project. Are you interested?" I almost said, "Are you sure? Or don't you think someone else would be better?" My usual self-deprecating responses. But instead, I heard myself saying, "Yes, I'd love to take that on. When would you like me to start preparing?" That afternoon, I did something I'd never done before. I went shopping for clothes that fit my body as it was, not clothes to hide in. I walked into a department store and went straight to the plus-size section without shame. I tried on blouses in colors I'd always avoided: emerald green, royal blue, deep red. I bought a jacket that actually fit my shoulders properly instead of hanging like a tent. When I got home and put on one of my new outfits, I looked in the mirror and saw something different. A professional woman who took up exactly the amount of space she was meant to take up. No apologies necessary. Leading the new client project meant stepping into a visibility I'd spent decades avoiding. I would be the primary point of contact for a company that was investing significant money in our services, and I would need to present our recommendations to their board of directors. The old Margaret would have found a way to decline or suggest someone else take the lead. The new Margaret was terrified, but determined. My first challenge came during the initial client meeting. As I walked into the conference room at Henderson Manufacturing, I could feel the familiar moment of assessment. That split second when people size you up based on appearance before you've said a word. But this time, instead of shrinking into myself, I stood tall, made eye contact, and introduced myself with confidence. Good morning, I'm Margaret Collins, Senior Accountant with Morrison & Associates. I'll be leading your account restructure project. I shook hands firmly and took a seat at the table without waiting to be invited to sit. The meeting went exceptionally well. My preparation was thorough, my recommendations were sound, and my presentation was clear and professional. But as we wrapped up, one of the board members, an older man in an expensive suit, made a comment that tested my newfound confidence. Well, Margaret, you certainly know your numbers. Though I have to say, we were expecting someone more senior for a project this size. The implication was clear. Someone who looked more like what he expected a senior professional to look like. 2 months earlier, I would have apologized and offered to have my supervisor take over. Instead, I looked him directly in the eye and said, I understand your concern about ensuring your project gets the attention it deserves. Let me share my qualifications so you can feel confident in our partnership. I proceeded to outline my 15 years of experience, my track record with similar restructures, and my professional certifications. By the time I finished, the room's energy had shifted completely. The board members were nodding approvingly, and even the skeptical man looked impressed. Well, he said, clearing his throat, it sounds like we're in excellent hands. When can you start? Walking out of that building, I felt something I'd never experienced in my professional life. Pride in my own competence without the qualifying caveat of, despite my size. I was good at my job because I was good at my job. Period. But the real test came a few weeks later at the grocery store. I was in the produce section, selecting vegetables for the healthier meals I'd been preparing since starting my walking routine with Lisa and Sandra. When I heard a familiar voice from the next aisle over, can you believe some people? Taking up the whole aisle like they own the place. It was the man from McDonald's. I recognized his voice instantly, that same cruel tone that had haunted me for weeks. My heart started pounding, and my first instinct was to hide, to avoid any chance of another confrontation. But then I remembered something Sandra had said during one of our walks. We teach people how to treat us by what we're willing to accept. I finished selecting my vegetables and walked around to his aisle. He was standing there with his shopping cart, making loud comments to his companion about other shoppers. When he saw me, I watched recognition dawn in his eyes. Instead of confronting him or creating a scene, I simply looked at him and said, "Excuse me," as I needed to reach past him for an item on the shelf. He moved aside automatically, and I continued with my shopping. But in that moment, something powerful had happened. I had refused to give him the power to make me feel ashamed. Later, as I was checking out, I saw him in line behind me. The cashier was a young man who recognized me from my weekly shopping trips. "How's your day going, Mrs. Collins? Find everything you needed?" "Wonderful, thank you, Kevin. How's school going?" I asked, genuinely interested in his reply about his community college classes. As I gathered my groceries and prepared to leave, I realized the man from McDonald's had witnessed an interaction where I was treated with respect and kindness, where my presence in the community was welcomed and valued. I hadn't needed to prove anything to him or defend myself. I had simply existed as a full human being, and that was revolutionary enough. The Henderson Manufacturing project became a turning point in more ways than I could have imagined. As I worked closely with their team over the following months, I discovered that my expertise was not only respected, but sought after. The CFO, Maria Santos, began calling me directly with questions that went beyond our contracted services. "Margaret, I know this isn't part of our original agreement, but would you be willing to consult on our quarterly projections? Your insights during our last meeting were exactly what we needed to see the bigger picture." These requests led to additional consulting opportunities with other companies in their network. For the first time in my career, I wasn't just doing my job well. I was being recognized as an expert in my field. Sarah noticed the change immediately. "Margaret, I don't know what's different about you lately, but whatever it is, keep it up. Your confidence in client meetings is inspiring, and frankly, you're bringing in more new business than anyone else on the team." The change wasn't just professional. My Saturday morning walks with Lisa and Sandra had evolved into genuine friendships. We'd expanded our routine to include occasional hiking trails, and I was amazed to discover that my body, this body I'd spent so many years criticizing, was capable of climbing hills, navigating rocky paths, and enjoying physical challenges I'd never imagined attempting. One Saturday, as we rested at the top of a particularly challenging trail, Sandra made an observation that stopped me in my tracks. "Margaret, do you realize how much stronger you've gotten? Not just physically, but in every way. You carry yourself completely differently than when we first started walking together." She was right. I had been so focused on internal changes that I hadn't noticed the external transformation. I walked with my shoulders back now. I made eye contact with people. I spoke up in conversations instead of waiting for direct invitations to participate. I wore colors that made me feel alive instead of trying to blend into the background. But the most significant change was in how I talked to myself. The constant internal criticism that had been my background soundtrack for decades was finally quieting. When I looked in the mirror now, instead of immediately cataloging my flaws, I found myself noticing things I liked. My eyes were brighter, my smile was more frequent, my posture conveyed confidence. I started keeping a daily gratitude journal, but not the superficial kind I'd attempted before. These entries were specific appreciations for my body and my life. Today I'm grateful that my legs carried me up 3 flights of stairs without getting winded, or I'm grateful for my hands that can prepare nourishing meals, or I'm grateful for my voice that contributed meaningfully to today's client presentation. The book club had become a monthly highlight, and I found myself looking forward to our discussions with genuine excitement. The women in the group had become real friends who sought my opinions, invited me to other social events, and treated me as an integral part of their community. Through them, I was meeting even more people who saw me as worth knowing. At my church's annual retreat, an event I'd avoided for 8 years, I signed up to facilitate a discussion group about overcoming personal challenges. As I prepared my materials, I realized I had a story worth sharing. Wisdom earned through experience, insights that might help others who were struggling with their own journeys towards self-acceptance. The retreat discussion group marked a pivotal moment in my transformation. As I stood before 15 women of various ages, sharing my story of moving from self-hiding to self-acceptance, I watched their faces and saw recognition, hope, and relief. Several women approached me afterward with their own stories of struggling with body image, workplace discrimination, and social anxiety. "Margaret," said a woman named Patricia, who was probably in her 40s, "I've been declining social invitations for 3 years because I gained weight after my divorce. Hearing you talk about choosing to show up anyway, it gives me hope that maybe I can start living again too." That conversation sparked an idea that would change not just my life, but the lives of many other women. What if there was a space where plus-size women could come together to share experiences, build confidence, and support each other in living fuller lives? Not a weight loss group or a support group focused on our problems, but a community celebrating our strengths and possibilities. I spent the next week researching and planning. I reached out to my church about hosting a monthly gathering. I connected with local plus-size clothing stores about partnerships, and I even called the community college about workshop space for professional development sessions specifically for women who had been marginalized because of their size. My first Confident Women Circle meeting was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon at the church fellowship hall. I wasn't sure anyone would come. I had prepared materials for 20 people, but secretly worried that I might be sitting alone with my ambitious plans and homemade cookies. At 2 p.m. sharp, women began arriving. Lisa and Sandra came, of course, bringing friends I hadn't met. Patricia from the retreat showed up with her sister. Several women I'd connected with through social media came from neighboring towns. By 2:15, we had 18 women filling the circle of chairs I'd arranged. "Welcome, everyone," I began, my voice stronger than I felt. "I'm Margaret, and I started this group because I believe that women of all sizes deserve to live boldly, pursue their dreams, and take up space in the world without apology. Who wants to share what brought them here today? The stories that emerged over the next 2 hours were both heartbreaking and inspiring. Women talked about careers they'd avoided pursuing, relationships they'd declined to explore, activities they'd given up, dreams they'd deferred, all because they believed their size made them unworthy of full participation in life. But we also shared solutions. Maria, a teacher, had started an after-school program for young girls focused on building confidence regardless of body type. Janet, who worked in human resources, was developing anti-discrimination training for her company. Sandra talked about her efforts to make the hospital's wellness programs more inclusive of different body types. As the afternoon progressed, I realized something remarkable was happening. These women weren't just sharing problems, they were identifying their own expertise and power. Each woman had developed coping strategies, professional skills, and personal insights that could benefit others. We weren't just a support group, we were a resource network. By the end of that first meeting, we had established 3 concrete initiatives: a monthly professional networking component for career advancement, a buddy system for trying new activities or attending events that felt intimidating alone, and a community outreach program to advocate for more inclusive policies in local businesses and organizations. "Margaret," said a woman named Elena as we were cleaning up, "I haven't felt this hopeful about anything in years. You've created something really special here." That evening, I updated my LinkedIn profile for the first time in 3 years. But instead of the minimal, apologetic bio I'd maintained before, I wrote a clear, confident summary of my expertise and added advocate for workplace inclusion and professional development for underrepresented women to my title. Within days, I received messages from women across the region who had heard about our group through word of mouth or social media. Some wanted to start similar groups in their own communities. Others were asking for advice about specific challenges they were facing in their professional or personal lives. I realized I wasn't just building my own confidence anymore, I was helping other women build theirs. The skills I'd developed in learning to advocate for myself were exactly the skills needed to advocate for others. If you believe that obese women can achieve anything, subscribe to the channel and share this video with a friend who needs to feel empowered. 6 months after that first Confident Women's Circle meeting, the transformation in my life was undeniable. Our monthly gatherings had grown to over 40 regular attendees, with women driving from 3 different counties to participate. But the real measure of success wasn't in numbers. It was in the stories of change that emerged every month. Patricia, the woman who had been avoiding social events since her divorce, had not only started dating again, but had also launched a small catering business from her home. "I realized I was hiding my amazing cooking skills along with everything else," she told the group. "Now I'm booking events every weekend, and I love meeting new people through my work." Maria had successfully pitched her confidence-building program to the school district and was now implementing it in 5 elementary schools. "We're teaching girls early that their worth isn't determined by their appearance," she explained. "The feedback from parents and teachers has been incredible. My own professional life had exploded beyond anything I'd imagined possible." The Henderson manufacturing project had led to 6 additional consulting contracts. Sarah had offered me a promotion to senior consultant with my own team, and I was regularly speaking at professional conferences about innovative approaches to small business accounting. But perhaps the most meaningful result was what happened when I received an unexpected phone call from Kevin, the young cashier from the grocery store. He had gotten my number from my church directory. "Mrs. Collins, I hope you don't mind me calling," he said nervously. "I wanted to tell you something. You know my little sister Emma? She's 13, and she's been really struggling with kids at school making comments about her weight. She's been refusing to go to school, and my mom didn't know what to do." He paused, and I could hear the emotion in his voice. "I told Emma about you, how you're always so confident and kind when you come through my checkout line, how you treat everyone with respect and expect the same in return. I showed her your picture from the newspaper article about your women's group. She said, 'She looks like me, but she looks happy and successful.'" Kevin continued, Emma asked if she could meet you. She wants to know how to be strong like you. Would that be possible? That meeting with Emma changed both of our lives. This brilliant, funny, creative teenager had been allowing cruel classmates to convince her that she didn't deserve friends, academic success, or participation in school activities. As we talked, I saw myself at 13, already learning to make myself small. Emma, I told her, those kids who are being mean to you, they're not the boss of your life. You get to decide what you're capable of, what you deserve, and how much space you take up in this world. And I'm going to help you figure out how to believe that. I started mentoring Emma regularly, and through her, I met other teenage girls who were struggling with similar issues. With permission from their parents and coordination with the school counselor, I began facilitating monthly workshops for teen girls about confidence, self-advocacy, and recognizing their own worth. The workshops were so successful that other schools began requesting similar programs. I found myself developing curriculum, training other facilitators, and speaking to parent groups about supporting children of all sizes in developing healthy self-esteem. One evening, as I was preparing materials for an upcoming workshop, my phone rang. It was my supervisor, Sarah, but she wasn't calling about work. "Margaret, I hope this isn't too personal, but I wanted to tell you something. My daughter is 16, and she's been struggling with anxiety about her body image. Nothing I say seems to help, but she watched one of your workshop videos online, and she asked if she could attend one of your teen sessions. I think you're exactly the role model she needs to see." As I hung up the phone, I realized something profound had happened. People weren't just tolerating my presence in their lives, they were actively seeking me out. Parents wanted their daughters to learn from me. Colleagues wanted to collaborate with me. Women were driving hours to participate in groups I facilitated. The woman who had once believed she needed to apologize for existing was now being recognized as someone who helped others live more fully. The voice that had been silenced by shame was now being amplified because it carried a message others needed to hear. I was no longer hiding from my life. I was actively creating it. The ripple effects of my transformation began reaching places I never could have anticipated. Emma, the teenager I'd been mentoring, had not only regained her confidence at school, but had also started her own Instagram account promoting body positivity for teens. Her posts about our conversations were reaching thousands of young people across the country. "Mrs. Collins taught me that taking up space isn't something you have to apologize for," she wrote in one post that went viral. "I'm done shrinking myself for other people's comfort. If you're reading this and you've been hiding too, maybe it's time to step into the light." The comments on Emma's posts led to speaking invitations for me from high schools, community colleges, and youth organizations. I found myself traveling on weekends to share my story with audiences I never would have imagined addressing. Teenage girls, their parents, educators, and healthcare professionals. At one particularly memorable event at a high school in Pittsburgh, a teacher approached me afterward with tears in her eyes. "Margaret, I've been teaching for 20 years, and I've watched so many bright, capable girls disappear into themselves because of body shame. What you're doing, giving them permission to believe in their own worth, it's literally life-changing. I want to bring your workshop to every school in our district, but the impact wasn't limited to young people. The Confident Women's Circle had spawned similar groups in 12 different communities, each led by women who had participated in our original meetings. I was receiving emails weekly from women who had heard about our work and wanted guidance in starting their own chapters. One email particularly moved me. It came from a woman named Dr. Judith Chen, a radiologist in Seattle, who had heard about our group through a professional medical conference. "Dear Margaret," she wrote, "I'm a physician who has struggled my entire career with colleagues and patients who question my competence based on my size. I've spent 15 years trying to be the perfect doctor to compensate for being the fat doctor. Your story about professional transformation gives me hope that I can advocate for myself and other healthcare workers who face similar discrimination. Would you be willing to speak at our medical center about inclusive workplace practices?" That speaking engagement at Seattle Medical Center led to a consulting contract with their Human Resources Department to develop anti-bias training specifically addressing weight discrimination in healthcare settings. The work was challenging, but incredibly fulfilling. I was helping to create systemic change that would benefit countless patients and healthcare workers. The success of these initiatives caught the attention of a reporter from our local newspaper who wanted to do a feature story about my transformation and community impact. I almost declined the interview. The old Margaret would have been terrified of that kind of public attention. But I realized this wasn't about me anymore. It was about showing other women what was possible. The article, titled "From Hiding to Helping, Local Accountant Builds Confidence Empire," was picked up by several regional publications and shared thousands of times on social media. The response was overwhelming. Women from across the country reaching out to share their own stories, ask for advice, or request help starting similar programs in their communities. But perhaps the most meaningful response came from an unexpected source. A week after the article was published, I received a handwritten letter at my office. The return address showed it was from a law firm in downtown Cleveland. "Dear Ms. Collins," it read, "you don't know me, but I was in McDonald's the day that man humiliated you. I'm the woman who stood up and told him his behavior was unacceptable. I've thought about you many times since then, wondering if you were okay, hoping you knew that what happened wasn't your fault." The letter continued. "When I saw your newspaper article, I cried with joy. To see how you've transformed that horrible experience into something that's helping so many other women. It's the most inspiring thing I've witnessed in years. Thank you for showing all of us what courage looks like." Reading that letter, I realized the full circle of my journey. The woman who had defended me that day had planted a seed that grew into everything I'd become. Her courage in that moment had contributed to my courage in all the moments that followed. I was no longer just living my own life fully. I was inspiring others to live theirs. The speaking engagements and consulting work had grown to the point where I needed to make a decision about my career. Morrison & Associates had been incredibly supportive, allowing me flexible scheduling for my advocacy work. But it was becoming clear that my passion lay in this new direction I'd discovered. Sarah and I had several conversations about how to move forward. "Margaret," she said during one of our meetings, "I'd hate to lose you, but I can see that your heart is in this empowerment work. What if we created a new position for you? You could still do some accounting consultation, but primarily focus on developing our diversity and inclusion initiatives." The offer was tempting, but I had a bigger vision forming. Late at night, after returning from speaking events, I found myself sketching out plans for something more comprehensive. A consulting firm specializing in workplace inclusion, with a particular focus on addressing size discrimination and empowering women who had been marginalized. The idea both terrified and exhilarated me. I had never considered entrepreneurship before, but as I looked at the demand for the services I was already providing, the waiting lists for workshops, and the consulting requests I was having to turn down, I realized there was a real business opportunity in this work. I spent 3 months developing a business plan, researching the market and building a financial model. The woman who had once hidden her expertise was now preparing to launch a company based entirely on that expertise. When I finally scheduled a meeting with Sarah to discuss my departure, I was nervous but certain. "I've decided to start my own consulting firm," I told her. "I want to focus entirely on helping organizations create more inclusive environments and supporting women in developing professional confidence." Sarah's response surprised me. "Margaret, I think that's brilliant. And I'd like Morrison & Associates to be your first client. We need exactly the kind of training and development services you're proposing. And I can't think of anyone better qualified to provide them." Within 6 weeks, I had given my notice, set up a home office, and officially launched Collins Inclusion Consulting. My first contract was indeed with Morrison & Associates, developing and implementing anti-bias training for their entire staff. My second contract came from Henderson Manufacturing, where Maria Santos wanted me to design a mentorship program for women in male-dominated departments. But the real test of my new business came when I received a call from a Fortune 500 company in Chicago. Their head of human resources had heard about my work through professional networks and wanted to discuss a major initiative to address workplace discrimination across all their locations. "Ms. Collins," she said during our initial phone consultation, We've had several incidents recently involving employee discrimination based on physical appearance, and we realize our current policies and training are inadequate. We need someone who understands these issues from both personal and professional perspectives. Would you be interested in developing a comprehensive program for us? The contract was larger than anything I'd imagined when starting my business. It would involve developing training materials, facilitating workshops at 15 different locations, and providing ongoing consultation for policy development. The fee they offered was more than I'd made in my best year as an accountant. But beyond the financial success, what thrilled me most was the scope of impact this work could have. Thousands of employees would receive training that could change how they treat colleagues. Policies would be implemented that could protect future employees from the kind of discrimination I'd experienced. The work I was doing was creating systemic change that extended far beyond my personal transformation. As I signed that contract, sitting in my home office wearing a bright blue dress that fit my body perfectly, I thought about the woman I'd been 18 months earlier. That woman could never have imagined running her own successful business, being sought out for her expertise, or having the confidence to advocate for systemic change. The phone rang, interrupting my reflection. It was Emma, the teenager I'd been mentoring, calling with exciting news. "Mrs. Collins, I got into the leadership program at my school. They selected me to represent our district at the State Youth Conference. And guess what my presentation topic is? Redefining leadership. How diverse voices strengthen communities. I'm going to talk about everything you've taught me about claiming your space and using your voice." As I hung up the phone, I realized my transformation had become circular. I was no longer just being inspired to change. I was inspiring change in others, who were then inspiring change in their own communities. The small act of choosing to live differently was creating waves of impact I could never have predicted. Success in business brought new challenges I hadn't anticipated. As Collins Inclusion Consulting grew, I faced the complex reality of being a plus-size woman in professional spaces where I was often the largest person in the room. Some potential clients questioned whether I was the right image for their companies. Others assumed my focus on size discrimination meant I was only qualified to address women's issues rather than broader organizational challenges. The first major test came during a presentation to a potential client, a prestigious consulting firm that was considering hiring me to address their company culture issues. I had prepared meticulously, researching their challenges and developing customized solutions. But when I walked into the boardroom, I could feel the familiar assessment happening, the momentary surprise, the quick exchange of glances between board members. The presentation went well until the Q&A session, when one of the partners asked a question that was clearly designed to undermine my credibility. "Ms. Collins, given your personal investment in these issues, how can we be sure you'll maintain objectivity in your recommendations?" The implication was clear. My size made me biased, emotional, unable to provide professional analysis. 2 years earlier, that question would have devastated me. I might have become defensive, over-explained my qualifications, or worse, agreed that my personal experience somehow disqualified me from professional expertise. Instead, I looked directly at the man who had asked the question and responded with calm confidence. "You raise an excellent point about the value of lived experience in consulting work. Just as you wouldn't hire a financial consultant who had never worked with budgets, or a technology consultant who had never implemented systems. My personal experience with workplace discrimination gives me insights that purely academic knowledge cannot provide. Combined with my professional training and 15 years of corporate experience, this creates a unique qualification that enhances rather than compromises my objectivity." I continued, "However, if you're looking for a consultant who will minimize the real impact of discrimination in your workplace or avoid making recommendations that might require uncomfortable changes, I'm not the right fit for your organization. I work with companies that are genuinely committed to creating inclusive cultures, not just checking compliance boxes." The room fell silent for a moment, and then the CEO leaned forward. "Ms. Collins, that's exactly the kind of direct, honest perspective we need. When can you start?" That contract led to some of the most challenging and rewarding work of my career. The consulting firm had a deeply entrenched culture of exclusion that went far beyond size discrimination. Women, people of color, and anyone who didn't fit the traditional corporate mold faced subtle but persistent barriers to advancement. My work involved not just training sessions, but fundamental policy changes, hiring practice reforms, and leadership development for managers who had never considered their role in perpetuating discrimination. 6 months into the project, I faced my biggest professional crisis yet. During a company-wide training session, a senior partner openly challenged my recommendations, claiming they were politically correct nonsense that would hurt the company's competitive edge. His comments were not only professionally inappropriate, but personally insulting, questioning whether people like me understood real business. The room erupted in uncomfortable tension. Junior employees looked shocked, while other senior partners seemed torn between supporting their colleague and acknowledging his behavior was inappropriate. I had a choice. I could minimize the confrontation, deflect with humor, or address it directly and risk losing the contract. I chose the third option. "I appreciate your concerns about business impact," I said calmly. "Let me share some data that might address them." I proceeded to present research showing that inclusive companies consistently outperform their competitors in innovation, employee retention, and financial results. I provided specific examples of how the recommended changes had improved performance at other organizations. Then I addressed the personal attack directly. As for whether I understand real business, my track record speaks for itself. I've successfully improved workplace culture and business outcomes for organizations across multiple industries. If you have specific concerns about any of my recommendations, I'm happy to discuss the reasoning and research behind them. What I won't discuss is whether my appearance qualifies me to do my job. The partner who had challenged me looked increasingly uncomfortable as I spoke. Other people in the room began nodding approvingly. When I finished, the CEO stood up and said, "I think we've heard enough. Ms. Collins, please continue with your presentation. And I'd like to see everyone in leadership positions in my office after this session." Later, I learned that the challenging partner had been given a formal reprimand and required to attend additional bias training. More importantly, the incident became a turning point for the company culture. Employees began speaking up more freely about discrimination they had witnessed or experienced. And the leadership team became much more committed to implementing real change. But the most significant result was personal. I had faced the worst-case scenario I'd always feared: public professional humiliation, and not only survived it, but emerged stronger. I had refused to accept disrespectful treatment, maintained my professionalism, and proven my competence under pressure. That experience taught me that my greatest strength as a consultant wasn't just my knowledge or experience. It was my willingness to stand firm in my convictions, even when it was uncomfortable or risky. Do you see how a determined, overweight woman can change not only her life, but the lives of other people? Subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell for more stories like this. 2 years after launching Collins Inclusion Consulting, I received a phone call that would change everything again. The caller introduced herself as Dr. Rebecca Martinez, Director of Organizational Development for a major healthcare system with over 200 locations across 15 states. "Ms. Collins," she said, "we've been following your work in the business community, and we have a situation that requires your specific expertise. We're facing multiple lawsuits related to size discrimination against both employees and patients. Our board has mandated a complete overhaul of our policies and practices, and we need someone who can lead this transformation across our entire system." The scope of the project was staggering. It would involve developing new policies for patient care, employee treatment, and facility accessibility. I would need to train thousands of healthcare workers, from front desk staff to surgeons, about providing respectful care regardless of patient size. The contract was for 2 years and would require me to travel extensively, build a team of associates, and essentially become the face of systemic change in healthcare inclusion. "Dr. Martinez," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "This sounds like exactly the kind of work I'm passionate about. But I need to be transparent with you. This would be the largest project I've ever undertaken. Are you confident that I'm the right person for this scope of responsibility? Her response surprised me. Miss Collins, we've done our research. You're not just qualified for this work, you're uniquely qualified. We need someone who understands discrimination from personal experience, but can also navigate complex organizational change from a business perspective. We need someone who has proven they can stand up to resistance while maintaining professionalism. Most importantly, we need someone whose own transformation story will inspire the culture change we're trying to achieve. Accepting that contract meant closing my home office and opening a real business location. It meant hiring employees and taking on the responsibility of not just my own success, but theirs as well. It meant becoming the public face of a healthcare revolution that would impact millions of patients and healthcare workers. The announcement of our partnership made national news in healthcare industry publications. Plus-size consultant to lead historic healthcare inclusion initiative read one headline. The attention was overwhelming, but also validating. What I had built from personal pain was now being recognized as professionally groundbreaking. But the real validation came from an unexpected source. 3 days after the healthcare contract announcement, I received an email that made me cry with joy. "Dear Margaret," it read, "you probably don't remember me, but I'm the cashier from McDonald's on the day that horrible man humiliated you. I've been following your story ever since I saw the newspaper article about your women's group. I want you to know that watching how you handled that situation with such grace and dignity changed how I think about standing up for people who are being mistreated. I'm now studying social work in college because I want to help people the way you've helped so many others. Thank you for showing me what courage looks like." The email was signed by Kevin, but not the teenage cashier I remembered. This Kevin was now 22, in his senior year of college, planning to work with at-risk youth after graduation. He had been inspired by witnessing my moment of vulnerability and the community response that followed. As I prepared for the healthcare project launch, I reflected on the journey from that humiliating day at McDonald's to this moment of professional recognition. The woman who had once believed she needed to hide from the world was now being hired specifically because of who she was, a plus-size woman who had learned to transform discrimination into empowerment. The first phase of the healthcare project involved visiting 12 different medical centers to assess current practices and identify areas for improvement. What I discovered was even worse than I had anticipated. Patients were being weighed in public areas, subjected to judgment about their lifestyle choices, and receiving substandard care because of healthcare workers' biases. Plus-size employees faced harassment from colleagues and were often passed over for patient-facing positions. But I also discovered something wonderful. There were healthcare workers at every location who were eager for change, who had been waiting for someone to give them permission and tools to treat all patients with dignity. My job became not just about fixing problems, but about amplifying the voices of people who were already trying to do better. 6 months into the healthcare project, we had implemented new protocols at 50 locations, trained over 3,000 healthcare workers, and were already seeing measurable improvements in patient satisfaction scores and employee retention rates. More importantly, we were changing lives every day, both for the patients who were finally receiving respectful care and for the employees who were learning to advocate for inclusive practices. The transformation was no longer just about me. It was about systemic change that would outlast my involvement and create a more inclusive world for everyone. By the 3rd year of Collins Inclusion Consulting, the business had grown beyond anything I could have imagined when I first started working from my kitchen table. We now employed 12 full-time consultants, had contracts with Fortune 500 companies across multiple industries, and had trained over 50,000 employees in inclusive workplace practices. But the numbers only told part of the story. The real measure of success was in the individual lives being changed every day. I received letters and emails constantly from people whose experiences had improved because of our work. A nurse in Phoenix wrote, "Because of the training you provided at our hospital, we now have policies that ensure all patients are treated with dignity regardless of their size. Last week, I was able to advocate for a patient who was being dismissed by her doctor because of her weight. Your training gave me the language and confidence to speak up professionally. That patient is now receiving proper care for her heart condition. A manager in Detroit shared, "The bias training you conducted at our company opened my eyes to how I was unconsciously discriminating against plus-size job candidates. I've since hired 3 women who might have been overlooked before, and they've become some of our strongest performers. I'm ashamed of my previous assumptions, but grateful to have learned better." These stories multiplied across every organization we worked with. The Healthcare System Project had become a model for other medical organizations nationwide. 5 additional healthcare networks had hired us to implement similar programs, and medical schools were beginning to incorporate our anti-bias curriculum into their training programs. The recognition from the professional community was gratifying but unexpected. I was invited to speak at the National Conference on Workplace Inclusion, where my presentation, From Personal Pain to Professional Purpose, received a standing ovation from 2,000 HR professionals. Harvard Business School invited me to guest lecture about entrepreneurship and social impact. The National Association of Women Business Owners honored me with their Transformational Leadership Award. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from my hometown. The Cleveland Chamber of Commerce named me Business Person of the Year, and the mayor proclaimed Margaret Collins Day to honor my contributions to the community. The ceremony was held at the convention center with over 500 people in attendance. As I stood at the podium looking out at the audience, I saw faces that represented my entire journey. Sarah and my former colleagues from Morrison & Associates were there, beaming with pride. Lisa and Sandra, my walking partners who had become lifelong friends, sat in the front row. Emma, now a confident college freshman studying social justice, had driven home for the ceremony. Dr. Martinez from the healthcare system had flown in from Texas. Even Kevin, the former McDonald's cashier who was now a social worker, attended with his family. But the moment that moved me most was seeing a group of women from our original Confident Women Circle, many of whom had gone on to start their own businesses, lead community initiatives, or make significant career changes. They held up a banner that read, "Thank you for teaching us to take up space." In my acceptance speech, I shared the story of that day at McDonald's, not the sanitized version I sometimes told in professional settings, but the raw, painful truth of how deeply it had affected me. "That man thought he was putting me in my place," I said. "He thought he was reminding me that I didn't belong, that I should be ashamed of taking up space in the world. What he actually did was wake me up to the possibility that I had been living far too small a life," I continued. "Every woman in this room has faced moments when someone tried to convince you that you weren't enough, smart enough, thin enough, young enough, confident enough, professional enough. Tonight, I want to remind you that their limitations are not your limitations. Their narrow vision is not your destiny. You have the right to pursue your dreams, build your business, speak your truth, and yes, take up space in the world." The standing ovation that followed lasted nearly 5 minutes. As I looked out at all those faces, women who were now living bolder lives, pursuing bigger dreams, taking up more space in their own communities, I realized that my personal transformation had become something much larger than I ever intended. After the ceremony, a young woman approached me. She looked to be in her early 20s, beautifully dressed, but with the hesitant posture I recognized from my own past. "Ms. Collins," she said quietly, "I'm starting law school in the fall, but I've been terrified that I won't be taken seriously because of my size. Hearing your story tonight, I think maybe I can be a lawyer after all. Thank you for showing me what's possible." As I hugged this young woman, I thought about the ripple effects that would continue long after I was gone. She would become a lawyer, and she would advocate for others. She would take up space in courtrooms and boardrooms, and by doing so, she would make it easier for the next generation of women to do the same. The success of Collins Inclusion Consulting had attracted attention from unexpected quarters. I began receiving invitations to speak at international conferences about workplace inclusion and organizational change. A publisher contacted me about writing a book based on my transformation story and business methodology. Universities were requesting case studies about our work for their business and social work programs. But the opportunity that truly stunned me came in the form of a phone call from Washington. DC. The caller introduced herself as a representative from the Department of Health and Human Services, explaining that they were developing new federal guidelines for healthcare accessibility and inclusion. Ms. Collins, your work with the healthcare industry has come to our attention at the highest levels. We would like to invite you to serve on the Federal Advisory Committee that will be developing national standards for inclusive healthcare practices. Your expertise in both organizational change and personal experience with healthcare discrimination makes you uniquely qualified for this role. Serving on a federal advisory committee meant that the policies we developed would impact healthcare practices across the entire country. Every hospital, clinic, and medical practice would eventually be required to implement standards that our committee recommended. The little girl who had once been told by a doctor that all her problems would disappear if she just lost weight was now being asked to help shape how doctors treat patients nationwide. The first committee meeting was held in a conference room in Washington that overlooked the Capitol building. As I sat around the table with physicians, healthcare administrators, policy experts, and other advocates, I had a moment of profound gratitude for the journey that had brought me to this place. During our introductions, when it was my turn to speak, I said, "My name is Margaret Collins, and I'm here representing the millions of Americans who have experienced discrimination in healthcare settings because of their body size. My goal is to ensure that our recommendations create real, measurable change in how patients are treated, not just policy documents that look good on paper." Over the following months, our committee developed comprehensive guidelines that addressed everything from medical equipment sizing to staff training on bias-free patient communication. We established standards for patient privacy during weigh-ins, protocols for addressing weight stigma in medical settings, and requirements for accessibility accommodations in healthcare facilities. The guidelines were controversial in some medical circles, but they were also groundbreaking. When they were officially adopted, I received calls from advocacy organizations around the world wanting to understand how we had achieved such comprehensive policy change. Meanwhile, the book project had evolved into something larger than I'd originally envisioned. Taking Up Space, a guide to professional and personal transformation, became not just my story, but a practical guide for women who wanted to move from hiding to leading in their own lives. The publisher scheduled a national book tour with events in 25 cities. The book launch event in Cleveland was held at the same hotel where I had once avoided the company holiday party because I was afraid of being the largest person in the room. This time, I walked into that ballroom as the guest of honor, wearing a stunning emerald green dress that fit my body perfectly, speaking to an audience of 400 people who had come specifically to hear what I had to say. But the most surreal moment came when I was signing books after the event. A woman approached my table and said, "Ms. Collins, I don't know if you remember me, but I was at McDonald's that day. I'm the woman who told that man his behavior was unacceptable." I looked up at her face, older now, but definitely the same person who had stood up for me when I couldn't stand up for myself. "Of course I remember you," I said, standing to embrace her. "You probably don't realize it, but you changed my life that day. Your courage gave me permission to find my own." She began to cry. "Margaret, when I saw you transform that horrible experience into something that's helping so many people, it reminded me that every moment we choose kindness over cruelty, every time we speak up for someone who's being mistreated, we have no idea how far those ripples will reach." As the book tour continued, I met women in every city who shared their own stories of transformation. Some had started businesses, others had changed careers, many had simply begun living more authentically. They would approach me after events and say variations of the same thing. "If you can build this life, maybe I can build the one I've been dreaming of too." 6 months after the book's publication, it hit the New York Times bestseller list. But more importantly, it was being used in college courses, corporate training programs, and support groups across the country. I received emails from professors who were assigning it in their business and psychology classes, from therapists who were recommending it to clients, and from book clubs that were using it as a foundation for discussions about self-advocacy and empowerment. The international speaking requests had grown to the point where I was traveling globally. I spoke at the International Conference on Workplace Inclusion in London, where I met advocates from dozens of countries who were fighting similar battles against discrimination. In Australia, I addressed a gathering of healthcare professionals about implementing bias-free patient care. In Canada, I consulted with government officials who were developing national anti-discrimination policies. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. The McDonald's Corporation reached out to me directly. They had heard about my story and wanted to discuss implementing company-wide training on customer dignity and respect. The irony wasn't lost on me. The company where I had experienced one of my most humiliating moments was now seeking my expertise to ensure it never happened to anyone else. "Ms. Collins," the corporate representative said during our initial call, "we understand that you had a negative experience at one of our locations several years ago. We want to do better. Would you be willing to help us develop training that ensures all customers feel welcome and respected in our restaurants?" The McDonald's project became one of our most visible success stories. We developed training modules that were implemented in over 14,000 locations worldwide, reaching hundreds of thousands of employees. The program focused not just on preventing discrimination, but on creating actively welcoming environments for customers of all sizes, abilities, and backgrounds. The day we filmed the training videos at a McDonald's in downtown Cleveland, I had a moment of profound closure. Standing in the same type of restaurant where I had once felt so humiliated, I was now the expert teaching others how to treat every customer with dignity and respect. The transformation was complete, from victim of discrimination to leader in preventing it, but the impact extended far beyond corporate training programs. Young women were reading my book and deciding to pursue careers they had previously thought were impossible. Parents were learning how to support children who faced size discrimination. Healthcare workers were changing how they communicated with patients. Managers were recognizing their own biases and creating more inclusive workplaces. Emma, the teenager I had mentored years earlier, was now a junior in college studying public policy. She called me one evening with exciting news. "Mrs. Collins, I got accepted to the summer internship program at the state capitol. I'm going to be working on anti-discrimination legislation. Everything you taught me about using my voice and claiming my space, I'm going to use it to create policy change." These stories multiplied across every community I had touched. The women from our original Confident Women Circle had become leaders in their own right. Patricia had expanded her catering business into a successful restaurant. Maria's confidence-building programs were now implemented in school districts across 3 states. Sandra had been promoted to head of nursing education at her hospital and was training other nurses to provide inclusive patient care. The ripple effects had become waves of change that extended far beyond anything I could have imagined. When I first decided to stop hiding from my life, what had started as one woman's journey from shame to empowerment had become a movement that was transforming organizations, communities, and individual lives across the country and beyond. 5 years after that devastating day at McDonald's, I stood before a mirror in my hotel room in New York City, preparing for my appearance on a national morning television show. The woman looking back at me was transformed in every possible way, not because my body had changed dramatically, but because my relationship with myself and the world had been revolutionized. I was wearing a bright red power suit that I had chosen specifically because it commanded attention rather than deflecting it. My hair was styled confidently, my makeup was bold, and my posture radiated the kind of self-assurance I had once thought was impossible for someone like me. But the most significant change was in my eyes. They held a light that came from knowing, without question, that I belonged in any room I entered. Collins Inclusion Consulting now employed 28 people across 4 offices. We had contracts with organizations on 3 continents and had trained over 100,000 people in inclusive practices. The federal healthcare guidelines we had helped develop were being adopted internationally, and other countries were sending delegations to study our implementation methods. But the numbers, impressive as they were, told only part of the story. The real transformation was in the countless individual moments of change that happened every day because of our work. Hospital patients were receiving respectful care regardless of their size. Plus-size employees were being promoted to leadership positions. Young women were pursuing careers in fields they had previously thought were closed to them. As I walked into the television studio that morning, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. The producer greeted me warmly and explained that they had received more advance interest in this interview than any other guest in recent months. "People are really excited to hear your story," she said. "The response to your book has been incredible, and we've gotten hundreds of emails from viewers who want to know more about your transformation." During the interview, the host asked me a question that brought the entire journey full circle. "Margaret, if you could go back and speak to that woman who was humiliated in McDonald's 5 years ago, what would you tell her?" I paused for a moment, thinking about all the pain, growth, and triumph that had led to this moment. I would tell her that the man who tried to shame her was wrong about everything except one thing: she was taking up space. And I would tell her that taking up space isn't something to apologize for. It's her birthright. Every person deserves to exist fully in this world, to pursue their dreams without shrinking themselves to fit other people's limitations. I continued. I would tell her that the humiliation she's feeling right now is going to become the foundation for the most meaningful work of her life. That the pain she's experiencing will give her the empathy and courage needed to help thousands of other women transform their own lives. And I would tell her that 5 years from now, she'll be sitting on national television, sharing her story not as a victim, but as someone who turned her greatest moment of shame into her greatest source of strength. After the show aired, my phone didn't stop ringing for 3 days. Women from across the country called, emailed, and messaged on social media to share their own stories and ask for guidance. The response was so overwhelming that we had to hire additional staff just to manage the inquiries. But among all those messages, one stood out. It was from a teenage girl in rural Alabama who had watched the show with her grandmother. "Ms. Collins," she wrote, "I'm 16 and I've been hiding from life because I'm fat. My grandmother made me watch your interview and she said, 'See, baby, you can be anything you want to be.' That lady proved it. I don't know what I want to be yet, but I know I don't want to hide anymore. Thank you for showing me that taking up space is okay." Reading that letter, I realized that the transformation was no longer just mine. It belonged to every woman who had decided to stop apologizing for existing, every teenager who chose confidence over shame, every person who had learned to advocate for themselves and others. What had started as one woman's painful experience had become a movement that was changing lives around the world. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in months. I took a quiet walk through Central Park by myself. As I strolled along the paths, watching families and couples and individuals enjoying the beautiful day, I marveled at how comfortable I felt simply existing in public space. No anxiety about taking up too much room, no shame about my visibility, no impulse to hide or deflect attention. I was exactly who I was meant to be, a woman who had transformed personal pain into professional purpose, who had learned that worthiness isn't determined by body size, and who had dedicated her life to ensuring that other people never had to learn that lesson the hard way. The journey from hiding to empowerment was complete, but the impact would continue rippling outward for generations to come. If you also believe in the transformational power of plus-size women, leave your like and comment on how this story inspired you. Today, as I write these final words of my story, I'm sitting in my office overlooking downtown Cleveland, the same city where I once hurried through streets hoping no one would notice me. My walls are covered with thank you letters from women whose lives have changed, photos from speaking events around the world, and awards recognizing work I never could have imagined doing when I was living small. But the most treasured item in my office is a framed photo from our most recent Confident Women Circle gathering. What started as 18 women meeting in a church fellowship hall has grown into a network of over 2,000 women across 47 states and 12 countries. They are entrepreneurs, executives, teachers, doctors, artists, and activists. They are women who decided to stop apologizing for existing and started celebrating their right to take up space in the world. If you're watching this video as a plus-size woman who has been hiding from her own life, I want you to know something. You are not broken. You do not need to lose weight to deserve respect, love, opportunity, or happiness. You do not need to make yourself smaller to fit into a world that profits from your shame. You need to make the world bigger to accommodate your dreams. The path from hiding to empowerment isn't easy. There will be people who try to convince you that you don't belong, that you should be grateful for whatever scraps of acceptance they're willing to offer. There will be moments when the old voices of shame try to pull you back into invisibility. There will be times when choosing authenticity over approval feels too risky, too hard, too lonely. But I promise you this, on the other side of that, fear is a life bigger and more beautiful than anything you can imagine from where you're sitting right now. On the other side of that fear are opportunities you haven't even dreamed of yet, relationships that celebrate all of who you are, and the profound satisfaction that comes from living as your full, authentic self. Your size is not an obstacle to overcome. It's simply one aspect of who you are. Your worth is not determined by the number on a scale, the size on a clothing tag, or the approval of people who have been conditioned to see bodies like ours as problems to be solved. Your worth is inherent, unchangeable, and absolute. The world needs what you have to offer. Your perspective, shaped by your unique experiences, is valuable. Your voice, even if it's been silenced by shame, has something important to say. Your dreams, even if they've been deferred by discrimination, are still valid and achievable. I used to believe that taking up space was something I needed to apologize for. Now I know that taking up space, fully, unapologetically, joyfully, is my responsibility, not just to myself, but to every woman who comes after me, who needs to see that it's possible to live boldly in a body like ours. You have the same responsibility. Not to be perfect, not to represent all plus-size women, not to prove that you're worthy of basic human dignity. You don't have to prove that because it's already true. Your responsibility is simply to live, fully, authentically, courageously. Start where you are. Start with one decision to choose yourself over comfort. Start with one moment of refusing to apologize for existing. Start with one conversation where you speak your truth instead of saying what you think others want to hear. Start with one outfit that makes you feel powerful instead of invisible. Start with one dream you've been deferring because you thought it wasn't for women like us. The McDonald's man thought he was putting me in my place. What he actually did was wake me up to the possibility that I had been living far too small a life. Your wake-up call might come in a different form. A cruel comment, a lost opportunity, a moment of profound loneliness in a crowded room. But when it comes, you have a choice. You can let it confirm every negative thing you've ever believed about yourself, or you can let it be the beginning of the most transformative period of your life. You can shrink further into the shadows, or you can step into the light and claim your right to exist fully in this world. I chose the light. I chose transformation. I chose to turn my pain into purpose and my shame into strength. And because I made that choice, thousands of other women have made it too. Our collective choice to live boldly creates space for the next generation to do the same. This is your invitation to join us. Not because the journey is easy, but because you deserve to know what it feels like to love your life as much as your life loves you back. You deserve to know what it feels like to take up exactly the amount of space you're meant to take up. No apologies, no explanations, no shame. You deserve to discover who you become when you stop hiding from the world and start showing up as yourself. The transformation begins now. The only question is, are you ready to take up space? If this plus-size empowerment story touched your soul, subscribe to the channel, leave your like, share it with someone special, and write in the comments what city and country you're watching from.